Everyone, and welcome to this webinar about hydrotherapy and MS and is it worth getting wet? So thank you very much for tuning in to listen to this webinar, and I do hope that you enjoy it. It's always a actually pleasure to speak on something that I am really very passionate about. So my first disclaimer about this is I am a absolute hydro lover, and I'm going to be talking about the real benefits of hydro. So some of you may know of me. My name is Julie Davey. I am a clinical neurological physiotherapist based in New Zealand now. So I work with a full hands-on clinical caseload full-time. I'm also the founder of the MS Get a Head Start program. And to say I am a passionate neurophysio who likes to achieve great outcomes. So let's start with why hydrotherapy. So since the dawn of time, humans have known that there is a potential healing effect and positivity that can be acquired from being in water. So I already know, those of you listening to the webinar, there's going to be a bunch of you who absolutely love a hot bath, or really like getting into a hot tub, or you love going into the ocean, or diving into a crystal flat, clear lake to go for a swim. And any of you that have experienced any of those kind of more traditional kind of, Roman Greek baths and bathing houses, we often feel a lot better when we get out of being in water. What is really sad is that it's been shown for quite some time that the aquatic environment, so we're going to talk about hydrotherapy. I will interchange between hydrotherapy and aquatic therapy, and that's just depending on, different literature calls it different things. So apologies if we chop and change between those a little bit. But it's shown to have this great rehab potential, but it is really underutilized. So hopefully through this talk, you will be inspired to really add hydrotherapy as, something to your toolbox if you are not using it much at the moment. So what I'm going to cover in today's journey is we will go through some of the risks and benefits of hydrotherapy, and that is in particular to the MS population. So knowing what modifications you need to make for that population, because there is a few potential risks around getting them in the water. So we want to make sure that you're really confident about what those risks are, and how to create a successful rehab program. So we're going to look at what some of the research is saying, and then looking at, how much exercise an individual with MS should be completing on a regular basis. So starting as a little bit of a platform, why is exercise so important for MS? So some of you joining may have already listened to a talk, a webinar I did for the ARC Academy earlier this year about MS and exercise. So thank you if you watched that and joining this one again. If you haven't watched that and you've got access to ARC Academy, I do really recommend watching it because it does give you a really good kind of, 1 hour webinar update about where we are with MS and exercise, and especially regarding some of that latest research. So why is exercise so important? Well, the best article I'm going to point you towards is this one by Yvonne Lermoff and Robert Mottle that was published in 2021. It is just a really great article that gives this great history, benefits, safety guidelines, promotions, exactly what it says in the title, but in a really readable kind of non-researchy terminology. So it is perfect to be giving to GPs, neurologists, other healthcare professionals to really push the importance of exercise. It's also a great paper to be able to give to your patients, your clients who have MS, who are keen to read what does some of the research say. So it's a really good synopsis, and it pulls on a few really interesting things about, MS is, exercise and MS is one of the most published areas. So there's more published research on the benefits of exercise for MS than any other neurological condition. And it's also an area that is really undertreated, regarding a lot of us don't see newly diagnosed individuals with MS. We tend to see much later stage you know, and there's a huge amount of people living with MS who never access a physio. So lots of work still to be done. Rob Mottle also did a great systematic review in 2017, which kind of brought together again, really, that we've got some great papers that are talking about the benefits, you know, from exercise, from gait, function, quality of life, cognitive impairment, fatigue, depression. You know, exercise has been shown to help in nearly all aspects of those individuals living with MS. There is going to be a full list of references with these slides. So if any of the research appeals you to for further reading, then I would point you towards these couple of papers. So something that I talk about a lot when I do training about MS and exercise is starting to get you to think a little bit more objectively and critically around the presentation that you see in front of you, of what really is a primary impairment from a neurological damage, from neuropathological damage to that central nervous system. When we know that there is an 80% inactivity rate in those living with MS. So that means there's only 20% of the MS population that you will treat who are anywhere close to achieving the World Health Organization's recommendations on physical activity and exercise. So that's not the MS specific recommendations that I'm going to go through later in this talk. That's just generally, you know, are you completing 150 minutes a week of being active? And 80% are not achieving that. So if we've got such an inactive population who quite rightly have a whole bunch of issues like heat sensitivity and neuromuscular fatigue, which can come on when exercising and be quite scary to have happen to you, don't really participate in much exercise. So when they're presenting with this list of impairments in front of you, really be critical and objective about what is probably a secondary impairment from lack of use. Okay, we know from simple things like from the age of 40, we are all starting to experience sarcopenia. So if you're not participating in a strength program twice a week, no matter who you are and what condition you may have, then you're potentially going to have some secondary impairments or weakness because of your inactivity of not strength training. So, you know, we need to make sure we are being really objective when we're looking at, you know, that critical analysis when someone's come to see us for help and they are quite impaired or just moderately impaired, and us go, oh, well, you know, it's MS and it's, you know, central nervous system damage and there's not much I can do. Well, I'm sorry, there's probably a hell of a lot you can do because they're probably really deconditioned. So being able to give them some hope that absolutely we're going to embark on an exercise program and see how fit and strong we can get to then see what impairments are left underlying after that. So principles of hydrodynamics. So I would point you towards Becker's paper 2009. It is obviously an old paper, but it's just a really nice paper that goes through the properties of hydrotherapy in some more detail. So if you want to know a little bit more about that, the Becker paper is quite good, and as well as the next paper I'm going to discuss, which is I can get my tongue around, my Amandrio 2020 paper. So when we look at buoyancy, basically buoyancy is what makes it possible to realize movements that can't be done on land. Okay, so it's this absence, you know, it's taking the weight off you. So that's amazing. Okay, if you have got any form of weakness and the buoyancy of the water allows you to move with more freedom, okay, and move into ranges that is really difficult on land, it's going to be great. It's also an equalizer. I think I've got, it might have been one of the early pictures of one of the MS groups that I run. I've had, you know, a kind of newly diagnosed, minimally impaired, someone who's walking with a stick and someone who is barely walking more than about 10 meters on crutches, all come into the same group class and complete the group class and feel like they're all working out hard but together, because the buoyancy allows those with more impaired mobility to kind of keep up with those who have you know, less impairments. Also with this turbulence, you know, the water moving around you, that yes, it adds resistance, but the turbulence means that there's an absence of a stationary position in the body. So this is continuously activating of your stabilizing muscles. So you think about that core activation, and you know, just like your ankle proprioception, everything's just trying to keep activated, keeping that tone on, okay, not allowing you to become floppy mess, to keep you stable. So you actually can work really quite hard in the pool without even trying. We've then got our hydrostatic pressure and viscosity, which do provide proprioception and sensory feedback, which is different to that experienced on land. So when people have sensory changes, okay, and, you know, balance changes, putting them in water can be really powerful at adding some more afferent feedback to that central nervous system to try and promote some positive plastic change. That hydrostatic pressure also really good for edema. So you think about those who are less active and they're going to get their swollen ankles. You know, putting them in the pool can really help with that edema compression and get some of that blood flow going again. Also great from a respiratory point of view, because depending on how deep you've got them standing in the pool, you know, if their rib cage, okay, is covered with water, that hydrostatic pressure is going to be helping to strengthen those intercostal muscles from a respiratory point of view. Then the viscosity and resistance goes hand in hand, okay? The more force you exert in the water, the more resistance you're going to get. And if anyone would like to tell me that working out in a hydro pool is easy, then I would challenge you on that. Because if you can push that water hard enough with appropriate resistant aids as well, you can have an exceptionally hard workout, even if you have no impairments. And then we've got our thermodynamics, and this is really important with the MS population, because I'll go over this a couple of times in today's talk, but water is a better conductor of heat, okay, and displaces heat than air. So someone with MS is actually going to find working out in the pool much more beneficial, because it's going to take the heat away from the body quicker. The challenge often is, and as I say, I'll go through this a couple more times in slides, it's ambient temperature in pools. Often pools are quite stuffy, and it's that ambient temperature which can set off the heat sensitivity a little bit more. But in general, water is really good from a thermodynamic point of view. So we've got these real principles that water allows us to access that is different to land. And as I say, hydrotherapy is about having another tool to your toolkit to try and change that inactivity level. You know, we've got 80% of people inactive, and we'll go through one of the papers that talks about, you know, access to hydro. But, you know, if your mobility is limited, a lot of people don't think hydro is appropriate. You know, a lot of people, because their mobility is limited, only are showering or are only having sponge baths. Like, not many people, obviously, with mobility limitations are going to get into a bath, because getting in and out of bath, as we all know as health professionals, is difficult and quite risky. So the last time that they got that sensation of floating in the water, and just think about how lovely it often feels to yourself to be immersed in water, they've not experienced potentially for years. And so they just think it's in the too hard basket. So you being able to show them that hydro's got all of these benefits is going to be really valuable. Okay, so taking you into the research. So it's always really handy when you want to present research and someone has done a fabulous systematic meta-analysis for you. So in 2020, Amidro et al. Did this, which is fantastic, and recommend reading this paper. So what they looked at was comparing aquatic or hydrotherapy against conventional physio, so normal land-based physio. Now they looked at this on fatigue, mobility, and balance. And as you'll see from these forest plot graphs on this slide, is that the aquatic hydrotherapy-based programs had a more significant impact on fatigue than general conventional physio. The aquatic and hydrophysiotherapy, again, had a better impact on mobility than conventional physio. And it also had a better impact on people's balance. So what this is kind of showing you is that, so I'll just go down a few slides, is that the results of this clinical trials indicates that 8 weeks of hydrotherapy can significantly improve, people's fatigue, perception, quality of life. So, why aren't we using hydro more when this paper actually shows that hydro can actually supersede conventional land-based physio? So, as a therapist, if I want to achieve results quicker with my population of patients I'm working with, I want best bang for my buck. Like, if getting them in the pool is going to be above and beyond land-based therapy, why aren't we doing it more? Okay, so if we go down into a few more of the research papers. So Karen Garford did some papers. I think this is one of the original ones back in 2012. Small sample size of 21 patients, and they were, this was a 8-week program of hydrotherapy, and they were in the pool 3 times a week for an hour. So kind of your standard, exercise research delivery, 3 times a week for an hour for 8 weeks. Okay, and what they saw compared to the control group, which were not doing anything, they were a sedentary control group, that you can see that there was a progressive improvement in the physical aspects of the modified fatigue impact scale. So you can see that over the weeks between 0, 4 and 8 weeks is that they felt that their physical fatigue improved, but also that their psychosocial fatigue improved. You see there's a little blip at 4 weeks, obviously that kind of getting used to having to exercise 3 times a week, but then by the time they get around to the 8 weeks, that has made a significant improvement. But then when we look at quality of life, through this, you've got physical quality of life has made a significant change by the week 8, and so has mental quality of life. So this is a great paper to show that, as I say, that fatigue and quality of life can improve with hydrotherapy input. The next one is Kara Garfard did another paper more recently in 2018, again a smaller randomized control trial of 32 women. So this was more specific that they had mostly women on this one. Again, 3 times a week for 60 minutes. The hydro group were making sure that they got somewhere between 50 to 70% of the estimated heart rate, so they were starting to push them a little bit harder. And they looked at using measures of the 6-minute walk test, the Berg, the modified fatigue impact scale, sit to stands and push-ups. So they're looking at some functional lower limb strength and upper limb strength. The control group, again, was an inactive control group. So that's something we just need to take in mind. But this lot made a significant improvement in all outcome measures, the group that were participating in hydrotherapy. So again, that we know that hydrotherapy can be really beneficial. So hydrotherapy specifically on pain. So again, another randomized control trial. Now, what was interesting about this is actually a 20-week trial. So it's a long trial, and it's of I Chi, so aquatic exercise. So Tai Chi in water, so I Chi. And they saw some really really good results with a significant reduction in not only pain, but in improved fatigue, spasms, depression, and quality of life, and no adverse effects. But they also had some really good follow-up regarding, the improvements they made was maintained. So when we look at the control group and experimental group here on the visual analog scale for pain, so you can see that there's a significant reduction during the 20-week program, so just post 20-week program in the pain. So you can see from baseline to 20 weeks. And then you'll see that there is a slight improvement as they stop exercising. Sorry, not improvement, it's a slight decline. They regress back into some pain. But even 10 weeks after finishing the exercises, the majority of those tested are still below that pain level compared to where they were beforehand. So we're probably looking here at neuropathic pain. So trying to get these individuals to then continue to use a hydrotherapy program for long-term management of that neuropathic pain can be really powerful. The effects of aquatic exercise on postural control and hand function. So this is quite an interesting paper because it's been quite specific about what it's testing, but also it's being very specific of its exercise delivery. And it's a very good paper, published in 2020, that they do follow quite a lot of the tidier protocols of really listing out how this program was done, and you can go and repeat some of the program. So some of you may be aware of Hallwick exercises. I'll personally say I wasn't when I read this paper, so I did a little bit of reading up about them, but some of you may be aware of them. They are traditionally used in cerebral palsy and stroke rehab, and they're very kind of rotational kind of based exercises, kind of exploring a movement pattern. So as I say, this is kind of the Hallwick exercises. So they were done in the pool, okay, these rotational, functional movement patterns compared against a plyometric exercise group. So again, in the pool. So both of these were aqua delivered, so hydrotherapy delivered programs. One is kind of a little bit slower state kind of movement, orientation work, while the other one is this kind of ballistic, plyometric, jumping, bounding, skipping, hopping. So the first thing I want to point out in this paper is a great paper to show that hopping, bounding, skipping, jumping is safe and appropriate to do in an MS population. And when we're looking at that improvement in gait function, if any of you follow any of Gavin Williams's work in Australia, you'll all be familiar with the fact that we know that strength training does not always correlate to improvement in gait, and it's often exploring ballistic plyometric training to help with that tendon recoil, to help with gait efficiency and actually make substantial gait changes. So there's no reason why the MS population shouldn't and couldn't be doing ballistic training as well to help with that energy efficiency that often they really struggle with. So both these groups did 8 weeks, twice a week of their exercise programs. And as I say, what they were measuring was interesting. They were measuring postural control, which was via a Biodex balance system. Okay, so that was a specific, computer algorithm thing that they put in, but also the 9-hole peg test was used for hand dexterity. Now, what was interesting is that both groups showed a significant improvement in postural control and dexterity. The Hallwick group showed a slightly significant more of a significant improvement in the hand function. Okay, but it basically shows that both said there was a great improvement for treating postural control and hand dexterity. And it was one of the first papers to show that the evidence shows that it is safe and effective, as say, to do this ballistic training. And what's really interesting is they had this hand function change when none of the exercises delivered were anything to do with hand function. So they had a few theories in the paper about whether this was due to that viscosity and the turbulence, the resistance of the water, that hand strength improved because they were moving their hands in the water a lot. So that increased afferent input from that proprioception and sensory that we'll talk about earlier with the hydrotherapy properties, whether that could be helping. But I also believe what it's also showing you of the power of the systemic effect of exercise. Sometimes it doesn't matter what you do as long as you are working them hard. So that ballistic plyometric training had nothing to do with hand function training, but their hand function improved, shows that there is a systemic effect of exercise. So as we talk there, significant improvement in trunk stability and hand dexterity. And then the next paper I wanted to just highlight, because I found this one quite interesting as well. So this was published in 2015 by Coron and his team, or Alon, their team. That this is a retrospective study. So this is on a MS research centre where people with MS will, be admitted and will do a 3-week intensive program. So this was retrospectively seeing if a personalised rehab program works. So there was 3 components that made up this exercise program. So 3 weeks of inpatient intensive rehab. So the first part was goal-directed physical therapy. So if the individual had a goal on gait training, then there was a proportion of each day that was spent on gait training. If their goal was about hand function, a proportion of their rehab was spent on hand function. Okay, so there was so one part of the day was spent on goal-directed physical therapy. The next part of the day was everyone did some intense aerobic exercise training on a bike. So this is looking at that neuroprotection, that getting that puffing and panting out of breath to get that positive neuroactive results from hard cardiovascular exercise. So they had these, task specificity, goal directed, as long as with our high cardio work that we know is beneficial. And then the third part they brought in was hydrotherapy. So all of these participants that went for this personalized program also did a hydrotherapy component. So these 3 components together, and it was a big study. They had 121, I think, in total. Oh no, sorry, I get that wrong. There was much more than that, because there was 87 in the mild mobility category, 104 of moderate, and 121 of severely. So, we've got just over 200 people with MS that they've done this study on, which is a pretty big study for MS. And they had significant improvements in all of their gait outcomes that they did. And what was interesting with these gait outcomes that they did is that there was a bigger improvement in those with moderate to severe impairments, okay, with their MS, compared to the more mild group. So what that is showing is using hydrotherapy as part of, a already established rehab program can add some extra effort, especially to see meaningful change in those who are more affected. And then just to bring us to more of kind of an up-to-date paper that's been released in the MS and hydrotherapy space is by Michelle Chen last year in 2022. That aquatic exercise for person with MS, and looking at that patient-reported preferences, obstacles, and recommendations. And the reason they looked into this is because, as we've just talked about, there's some really strong evidence that exercise in the water, so hydrotherapy, aquatic therapy, is not only as good as land and should be incorporated, but in some cases can get better results than being land-based therapy. But why is there such a poor uptake? And especially when we know that actually being in water could be safer, the thermodynamics could be better on heat regulation, etc. It's just not very well taken up. So they did this review to see, what people were really thinking. And basically, my individuals with MS, if they had participated in the Hydro program, had liked it. So it was really well liked among people with MS. But the big problem was a massive lack of access. So to either get to a hydrotherapy pool or get into a pool that was appropriate, whether that's steps, hoist, changing rooms, parking, how far they have to go from the car park to get to change rooms, etc. And its expense. Now, I don't know where the state of play is regarding hydrotherapy pools in Australia at the moment, but I know in New Zealand, pretty much every hospital that had a hydrotherapy pool has ripped it out. And what's really sad is even our universities that teach physiotherapy have now removed and ripped out their hydro pool. So the students coming up through our undergrad and master's entry-level physiotherapy don't do a hydrotherapy program because I don't have a pool anymore. So, you know, I know there's this real lack of access. And when I have challenged health authorities about, you know, why are you removing the pool? And they will often tell you because it's expensive to run, which it is. Heating pools is not cheap. And they'll say because of the lack of use. And that's absolutely right, that not enough therapists are taking their clients and patients into a pool. So I think more needs to be done to help support people with MS to access the pools, because when they get the opportunity to access a pool, they significantly enjoy it. Okay, so what are the risks to consider? Heat sensitivity and neuromuscular fatigue I'm going to cover on the next couple of slides, but there is also increased hazards in the environment. Okay, so water, slippery. Okay, people with poor mobility, slippery, risk of falls is huge. Okay, so you have to be really aware of everything from the moment they walk through the door, because most pool sides are wet. Okay, so how are they going to access the pool area? What are the changing rooms like? Because you're guaranteed the floor of the changing rooms is going to be wet. That often can be a bit of a walk between changing room and the pool. How do you get in and out of the pool? Steps, hoists, ramps, wheelchairs all need to be considered. Okay, you know, we have more challenging environment if we were to have a cardiovascular event. You know, very hard to do CPR in the water. You've got to get them onto the side of the pool, etc. So things about safety, you shouldn't ever be, you know, one health professional in the pool by yourself without the ability to access someone else to come and help. Okay, so, you know, it is a general risky environment that you need to take onto those factors. Bladder and bowel, there's obviously lots of individuals living with MS that have challenges with their bladder and bowel. So how might that need, you know, might need to be managed somehow, or could be a barrier for them accessing the pool. And dehydration, not many people go to a pool with a bottle of water. And this is even the same for Olympic swimmers. You know, I am fortunate enough that I live in Auckland and I can tootle along to our national aquatic swimming pool. They never built a hydrotherapy pool when they rebuilt the pool either, which is highly disappointing. But, you know, in their big 50-meter Olympic-sized pool, and often you will see some of the Olympic trainers in there and, you know, Paralympians. They don't tend to have many bottles on the side of the pool. So people often get pretty dehydrated when most people go to the gym and walk around with a water bottle with them. So that's just a little thing about keeping hydrated. So fatigue, heat sensitivity, and neuromuscular fatigue. So I'm not going to go into this in lots of details because I have done a previous talk on this, and I think there's another talk in this series that is covering fatigue. But with MS, the individual living with MS needs to ascertain that there is a difference between cognitive fatigue and physical fatigue. So cognitive fatigue is the fact that they feel tired no matter what time of the day, no matter what they've done. So a classic, I would say, would be your office worker sits down, commutes to work, sits down at work all day, sits down to commute home and gets home and they're exhausted. Well, they're not exhausted because they've done anything physically. They're exhausted because their brain is exhausted. So just think about this chap in this picture here. He's got 3 computer screens going on. Okay, I think I would be pretty exhausted after a couple of hours of that amount of stimulation. Compared to physical fatigue, when you know you've actually done some exercise, then you know it's fatigue from that exercise. So often getting individuals with MS to understand that when they feel tired, there is a huge percentage of the time that it is likely to be cognitive fatigue, not physical. But the human body, we don't know the difference. We just feel tired. So being able to be quite critical and reflect on your own activity levels to go, oh yeah, actually, I haven't done any exercise or I haven't been very active. So that fatigue I'm feeling is cognitive fatigue. So heat sensitivity. So you only need an increase of 0.5 degrees centigrade within the body, which is pretty easy and pretty quick as soon as you start exercising, okay, to cause a temporary symptom exacerbation. So this is where people with MS will exercise and all of a sudden they will get double vision, blurry vision, their sensation will change, they'll get wobbly, their speech might slur, a whole raft of different symptoms can approach. And if you have MS, this can be highly scary, okay? Something's happened, you think you're having a relapse and you think it's happened because of the exercise. And if as a physio or an exercise physiologist, you're delivering exercise and you've got a patient who suddenly goes, oh God, I can't feel the right side of my body, and try not to panic, okay, is understanding this unique phenomenon that does happen in MS, because it can be 60 to 80% of the population, is that it is a reaction to their nerve conduction speed slows down because of this temporary symptom exacerbation, because of the heat, okay? So symptoms will resolve when the core temperature drops down. So we know that exercise causes heat changes in the body. Heat changes can cause symptom exacerbation in MS. So to make a more pleasant exercise environment so we can get better engagement in exercise, we need to address cooling. So they've seen that active body cooling is associated with restoring and even improving physical and cognitive fatigue, okay, and function. So they reckon pre-cooling, okay, the body temperature by 0.5 to 1 degree is beneficial. So if you're at a pool and there is a cold pool that the individual can get into, first of all, to really drop their core temperature, or having a really cold shower, that can be beneficial. The biggest problem about pools is the ambient temperature. They're often stuffy and there's not enough airflow. So you need to be really mindful of trying to make sure that the ambient temperature is down. As I mentioned before, that water disperses heat more effectively than air, and water is a more efficient conductor, so transferring heat 25 times faster than air. So the body is thermoneutral when the water is at 34 degrees, okay? So what we need to think about is keeping, so when accessing a hydro pool, no hotter than 34 degrees. Really, you probably want something between 30 to 32. Okay, for some people, they'll really enjoy working out in cooler water temperatures. Most public swimming pools would sit around 27 to 28 degrees. Okay, but that 30 to 34, 32 is really good. And you can go up to 34, especially in winter when it's a bit cooler. And if someone's quite got a lot of spasms, being in the warmer pool is better, but you don't want to be any hotter than 34. You could also get people to pre-cool with something like an ice vest, okay? So on their drive to therapy, okay, can they grab an ice vest out of the freezer, chuck that on in the car while they drive to physio, okay? They can do the hydro program, and these vests often stay icy for several hours. They could even put the ice vest on when they come out of the pool. So try and set up fans, make that ambient temperature better. You've got to think about the accessibility with the pool environment and the heat, because people can be a real wobbly mess. And I'll talk a little bit more about that with the neuromuscular fatigue slide next. So ambient air temperature, airflow, no hotter than 34 degrees, okay? If it is, and all of this stuff goes wrong, you're not going to create a risk that's going to cause a relapse. What you're going to do is create a risk of temporary symptom exacerbations, which is basically just going to be a bad experience for the person living, with MS. So we don't want those bad experiences. We want them positive, but you're not going to do anything dangerous, okay? But just try and be, educated about what you're subjecting your patient to. Okay. Neuromuscular fatigue, okay, so that's a temporary depletion of muscle energy reserves, okay, so because of partial innervation of the nervous system. So the central nervous system has demyelinations, which affects its conductivity. So muscles are potentially not fully innervated. So a partially innervated muscle is going to run out of its battery pack, its mitochondria, its energy supplies faster. Okay, so the way we get around this in MS is interval training. Okay, so when we're talking interval training, generally talk about an exercise to rest ratio of 1:1. So you do the same thing in the pool. So in the pool, I tend to do things by seconds. So they might do 30 seconds of work, 30 seconds of rest. They might do 20 seconds of work, 40 seconds of rest, because it's at least 1:1. Okay, so it's shorten up the intervals, but you can still have lots of sets. So if you are doing something against resistance, they might just be doing 5, dumbbell pull downs instead of 10, but they're going to do 6 sets of 5, okay, to get up to their 30 rather than 3 sets of 10. What you need to be really careful of with neuromuscular fatigue is because of the buoyancy effects of the hydrotherapy, and they can have this freedom of movement, is they will work really quite hard in the pool, but not feel it, okay? They'll be in the pool, they'll be moving around, feeling great, putting in lots of effort. And then when they go to get out of the pool and they lose buoyancy and are confronted again with gravity, it can be really hard to move. And basically, they've just kind of worn themselves out. So if anyone's new to the pool, I would always recommend keeping their hydro session pretty short. Okay, might be 20 minutes max, 30 minutes max, just to see how they respond. What you don't want to do in someone's first session is work them really hard for, 50 to 60 minutes, and then they go to get out the pool and their legs can't hold them up, because they're not going to get back in the pool if they experience that. So start small, start achievable, get that positive buy-in, and then as they enjoy the pool, do a bit more. So with your setup, I would always have a chair right next to the exit of the pool. So whether that's ramp, steps, hoist chair, have a chair there ready for them to sit on, have some towels. So if they get out the pool and their legs are really wobbly, sit them down, wrap some towels around them, give them some water to drink, tell them to stay there for 5 minutes or so, just have a rest. So what I do at the end of all my hydro sessions is tend to do some relaxation. So get some good noodles, some neck floats, pop them back into supine, fully supported, and get them to relax for, 5 minutes or so before getting out of the pool, because that just means that neuromuscular fatigue can settle a bit before you suddenly get them out. And prepare people for this. Prepare them that, they're going to work hard in the pool, but they've got to keep a little bit of an energy reserve so they can still get changed, get dressed, and leave. Okay, so one of the game changers in MS and exercise is this research paper. So if you have not read this paper by Caleb 2020, I strongly recommend you get it, because it is the best recommended physical activity and exercise guidelines we have in the industry for MS. So as I say, if you've not read this, then this is a must read. What this does is breaks down what exercise, how often, how intense individuals with MS should be doing throughout the disease trajectory of the EDSS scale. So right from the unimpaired right through to the bedbound. Okay, so it's a really powerful tool, so we can be really evidence-based when we are giving out exercise programs about what quantity and quality of exercise we are needing. So this is the recommendations for our minimally impaired, our mild impairments are 0 to 4.5. I'm not going to list them all in today's talks. I've done that on previous talks, and you can find this research paper because it is freely available. But look, so this is, if we think about the World Health Organization's recommendations, 150 minutes a week. Now, this is evidence-based specific for MS. We know that they need to be aerobically exercising 10 to 30 minutes 3 times a week. but they actually need to be getting into this advanced aerobic zones between 70 to 80% for up to 40 minutes a week, 5 times a week. So you might start your population off with, okay, we've got 3 times a week of 30 minutes, you might be starting. But when they are ticking that box and they've got into the groove, then you need to tell them that actually what they need to be doing is 70 to 80% for up to 10 minutes, 5 times a week. On top of that 5 times a week, one of those sessions or an extra session needs to be at 90 to 100% maximal high intensity interval cardio training, okay, to really challenge that cardiovascular system for the neuroprotective release of the BDNF that we are all gunning for in neuroplasticity and neuroactive exercise. They need to be doing, on top of 5 to 6 days a week of cardio, they need to be doing 2 to 3 days a week of strength training, flexibility daily, and if they've got a neurospecific impairment, balance, vision, sensation, hand dexterity, foot drop issues, they potentially also, on top of 6 days a week of cardio, 2 days a week of strength, daily stretches, could be doing 3 to 6 times a week of neuromotor, so basically rehab specific exercises. So it's huge. And as I say, I go into this in a lot more in the other talk, but what you just need to do with this research is realize the potential your patients have to get better, because if they are not ticking the boxes of all of this, then what that means is that they have got a really strong potential to be doing better than they are. So when someone comes in and says to you, I'm getting worse, or, you know, my MS has really affected me, I'm not feeling like I've got the best quality of life, you need to be constructive around where the evidence is at. The evidence is pointing towards this is the amount of exercise needed to be achieving that. All right. So now hopefully these are all going to play. So these are just a bunch of ideas for some exercises in the pool. Now, some of you will potentially be all over hydro and don't need to see any exercise examples, but I thought they'd just be good to kind of throw in. So this is a plank version, so using the dumbbells as a plank and then doing opposite arm and leg lifts. You see I had a wobble there. The shallower the pool, the harder this is, because you can change the angle that you are at. As we looked at one of the research papers, you can really work on some ballistic training. So I do lots of jumping, bounding, hopping, skipping in the pool. Here's a lovely cardio exercise with these dumbbell weights that you are boxing as fast as you can for 30 seconds. You know, there's a lot of turbulence and resistance going there. And I love a noodle push down, really good for that proprioception, sensory changes, and obviously all of that balance work as well as foot control. Love a little bit of hip extension. Okay, so this is the knot in the noodle, stops it running away. So again, great for getting a bit of range, but also some eccentric control. Then with that knotted noodle, I love a noodle. I call it the pretzel. Okay, now you can do some trunk rotations with the pretzel, really good for stability. And again, you can kind of get that heart rate up by putting some real pace into this as well. I'll use things like hand paddles, so swimming hand paddles. You see we've got a sweep here. This is lovely for improving arm swing. We know a lot of holding on happens with MS because of that trunk instability and the lack of arm swing. So good for that balance, but also getting a more powerful swing. Then we've got another one. I do love a heel kick in the MS population, trying to activate those hamstrings. Okay, especially at some pace. You could do this in standing and just one leg fast up and down, or pop it into a run. Getting lots of bits of fun equipment. So, I mean, it's a ball, it's not that much fun, but, you know, here we've got some ball throws, bit of vestibular work, standing on one leg. You can have them, you know, I've got things like floating basketball nets that people have got to try and dunk the basketballs in. Another ballistic one of some tuck jumps. You can see that my right leg's a little bit better than my left leg on these tuck jumps. But again, really trying to get that ballistic, making them work hard. All right, so is hydrotherapy worth getting wet for? Hopefully from today's talk, you're going to go, absolutely. The evidence is there that it is as good as, if not, for certain people with MS, better than land-based therapy. So especially for those who are more severe, moderately impaired, okay, can get some benefits. We've seen that ballistic plyometric high-level therapy is also really safe and applicable. We can see that hydrotherapy has a systemic effect on the brain, improving things like hand function, can also improve lots of things like balance, pain, quality of life. Your role as a therapist is you've got to promote it, okay? You've got to find your local hydro pool, and if it's just a swimming pool, you know, get in there, get some equipment. A lot of this stuff is cheap. You can get noodles from, you know, $5 from, I don't Kmart, somewhere, I'm trying to think, Australian shops, but you can get things cheap. You need to reduce the access barriers. You're going to have to find places with hoists, with ramps, with wheelchairs. You know, could you do this on a sit in the sea? Yes, you can, you know, as long as it's not dumping waves. But if you've got a really sheltered beach that someone can get on a beach wheelchair and do this in the sea, great. The tide is definitely hard work, and that's soft sand. You do need to factor in the heat, so be really aware of ambient temperatures. Encourage people to pre-cool. Definitely encourage them to bring a drink bottle that's icy cold and drink it throughout the session, okay? And don't get into pool that is warmer than 34 degrees with the MS pop. And that neuromuscular fatigue, be aware that when they get back out on gravity, they are likely to be a wobbly mess. So make sure that you interval train in the pool, that they get sufficient rest times and they get a sufficient rest before you get them out of the pool. So thank you very much for the time. This is a recorded webinar, so no time for actual questions. However, please feel free to visit the MS Get a Head Start website for more information, and there's a whole bunch of free webinars and resources up there for you to have a look at, as well as our health professional course. So if you want to know more about MS Get a Head Start, but also as a health professional, really find out what is the latest and greatest in treating MS from a professional development point of view, we do provide an excellent online course which is over 10 hours long, and lots of research papers are featured in it to really show how strongly evidence-based it is. If you do any have more questions, feel free to drop me an email, so Gilly@ms-ghs.com, and if you scan that QR code, that will take you straight to the MS Get a Head Start newsletter page, and you can sign up to receive our regular newsletter. So I'd just like to thank the Advanced Rehab Centre again for a very kind invitation to get on my little soapbox and talk about something I'm very passionate about. It's been an absolute pleasure, and hopefully you will all go and get your bathing suits on and get your clients into the pool. So happy swimming.